About 50 years ago, researchers found deposits of really rich soil in an area in the Amazon where they weren't expecting it. And subsequent research has theorized that this came from settlements of ancient Amazonians who used all of their domestic debris, which was charcoal and ash, and they put them in pits. Over decades, over generations, that changed the nature of the soil. And today we have recognized those types of behaviors and those deposits of human-changed soil all over the world. And carbon dating of those soils shows that that carbon was introduced thousands of years ago and is still there and persisting in the soil. Though we're not certain whether these soils were primarily human-created, we're also not certain whether we can reproduce them over a short period of time today. That may have taken centuries. But this has led many people to look at biochar as a potentially transformational agricultural soil amendment.
Because fire management by humans has been part of the Earth's history since the very beginning. We find this type of material, this biochar type material, everywhere in the world practically. So these are these fantastically fertile soils, and so we can study these soils and we ask the question, can we recreate those?
Charcoal's been made from time immemorial, but from the grower point of view, what was always lacking was a good agronomic perspective. Are my crops going to grow well or not?
This kind of data is so critical. It is these multi-year trials that it takes to sort of build that confidence, that to take the risks on it, because it is a new product.
This is an amendment. It's not fertility. You know, that's an important distinction.
So this year is the big experiment. Sometimes you have to do that on the farm, just go for it to see if it's going to work.
We see it as a jump start to the whole system when it's in a very, very degraded state.
You can take the CO2 and the air and put it in the soil for hundreds of years. And I said, now you got my attention.
An important part of the effort here is to make sure that farmers are aware of what these benefits really are in practical terms, not just in academic terms. We're at Arthur's Point Farm in Ghent, New York, and we grow native trees, shrubs, and perennials. And we immediately were attracted to the idea of biochar as a soil amendment, and also from its carbon benefits, for its climate benefits, and climate resilient benefits. Biochar is biomass that's been converted through a process called pyrolysis. In our case, we use wood, and you can use other types of biomass. We split it and we put it into our retort kiln, and then it goes through a process of pyrolysis in the kiln, which is usually about an 8-hour process. You superheat that biomass in the absence of oxygen or low oxygen, and it converts, it essentially cooks the biomass and turns it into charcoal, almost pure carbon. It's this incredible glassy, porous, incredible amount of surface area material. We know charcoal, good hardwood charcoal, from barbecuing. This is essentially the same thing. Once the process is finished, we remove the char from the kiln and we grind it up. And then we take that char and we add it to our compost windrows in the spring. So we have compost with raw manures from neighboring livestock farms. We add enough biochar so that when that manure reduces down through the composting process, we end up with about 10% biochar by the overall mass of that biochar compost blend, which is sufficient for us to be introducing this inoculated biochar into the soil. Biochar raw, biochar on its own, is like an empty sponge, not full of water, not full of anything. So what you want to do is prepare the biochar, inoculating it by allowing water to saturate it and allowing microorganisms to saturate it. So once it's introduced to the soil, it's actually a full sponge, which can then release and support those other microorganisms and moisture in the soil for the plants.
But if you look down there at these bigger chestnuts that are just a year older.
So in 2022, we received a grant from SARE, Novel Approaches Grant, which is a USDA program, Sustainable Agriculture Research and Education. The SARE grant was designed to study the effects of biochar on perennial crops, chestnuts in particular. So we designed a project with Woods End Lab to look at the efficacy of biochar and compost in different combinations with a new chestnut orchard.
I found a whole chapter in Justice von Liebig's original book on soil fertility saying we also need to study the effects of charcoal in soil. He meant biochar. Of course, we didn't have the name there, but it's very interesting that he highlighted it way back in 1830, and we have to kind of come back to basics on that. And again, that's what I tried to bring to this study.
We're studying the effects on soil health through annual soil samples, leaf tissue samples on the health of the trees, visual surveys of the size and growth and vigor of the trees, and deep carbon samples over a 3-year period. So the last year of our project in 2025, we set out to visit farms that are using biochar in our region and to get a broader sense of the interest and the current activity around biochar, what we are seeing on real farms and how people are using it.
We're here at Whitefeather Farm, and Whitefeather Farm is a nonprofit, and we do various research projects and education. And the people who come to our workshops and our events, it's a lot of local community, but also farmers from the region, people who are interested in regenerative agriculture. But in terms of long-term local field trials, that is something that we don't have a lot of data on, especially in this region. The key of any biochar kiln, like flame cap kiln, is you want to restrict the air to only the top. So no air can get it from the bottom or the sides. And then what happens is as you build it up, the flame, which is the gases coming off the material, is just burning on the top. And that top also eats all the oxygen. So all it does is heat the material below. So as the char builds up, it continues to get heated by the flame, but the oxygen isn't able to interact with it and actually burn out that carbon. Yeah, once you see that ash forming, the flames start to die down, those gases are burned off, and you're starting to just get that ash coating happening, is the time to quench it. Basically, when wood burns, it burns twice. So the first burn is when you burn off all the gases. And so we're basically stopping the process after that first burn is complete of all the gases heating up and burning off, and stopping it before the carbon burns down. So the Kontiki are sort of the smaller on-farm scale, but if you really, if you're a big farm, you need a lot of production, then you move up to a commercial scale. And that's where we look at something like New York Carbon and the carbonator. You're able to put in up to 15 tons of feedstock per hour. It reduces the volume by about 90% and is able to keep about a 20 to 25% carbon content of that original volume. So that machine can produce up to 20 yards of biochar material a day. The carbonator was actually originally designed as a forestry material reduction machine, and that's why it is mobile. But the idea was that it was able to just reduce volumes of forest debris, and specifically fuel that might cause or sustain a wildfire. For that machine, for the carbonator, we utilize all the offcuts from the lumber mill. Every biochar technology, I think, has its sort of pros and cons or pluses and minuses. Something like the carbonator is great because there's very minimal pre-processing that needs to happen when you're making biochar, so you can put 20-foot logs, full logs in there if you want, and when it's cooking it'll turn those into biochar. After we make the biochar in the Tiger Cat, we load it into 20-yard containers. We bring it up to our storage facility, and there we'll generally mill and screen it to 1/2 inch and minus. Sometimes we'll load it in super sacks. Oftentimes it'll just be bulk deliveries on a dump truck. One of those projects we have been involved in was the Hudson Valley Biochar Pioneers project. We were able to get biochar, about 12 yards of biochar, to 10 different farms in the Hudson Valley where they could test it. We're running some very basic field trials with that. There, farmers are able to incorporate the biochar into their specific field conditions, and we're hoping to see some good results from that.
We are fourfold farm. We are producing exclusively for the Hudson Valley Seed Company, and it's open pollinated and heirloom seeds, but also dahlia tubers, mixed alliums, sunchokes, etc. I'm preparing to put down most or all of this biochar into a future allium field. Right next door you have a pile of compost. That is what's going to take purchase inside the nooks and crannies of this carbon product, which is incredibly porous. You can actually, maybe see some of the holes in here. And, most farms would have mixed this with their compost prior to application. But what we're gonna do is to apply it directly to the field, a field that's had compost and cover crop last season. We're gonna let it field inoculate over the next 4 to 5 months, and then add compost later prior to planting our shallots and our garlic. We always put down compost. We do different mixed amendments, but this is the first year we've ever put biochar down, and there's some kind of specific reasons why we decided to put it here, where we're putting it. One of those reasons is that this site does not have drip irrigation farm-wide. We have a lot of open spaces. Our rows are 500 feet long, and despite the fact that it seems like we're trending towards wetter northeast, that doesn't change the fact that we have really intense drought periods. So on a dry farm, there's a year where we can't get water, so biochar actually can really help you retain water in your soil, build the soil structure, and act like a little bit like a spud, not only for microbial life, but for nutrition and water. So for a large-scale acre of alliums going down that will not have overhead or drip irrigation, it seemed like the right thing. Part of the grant is that there is actually a Cornell scientist that's going to be coming to do soil sampling to actually really see what's happening. So we're going to get some really in-depth soil analysis that will, more than likely just support my gut feelings. And farmers are big on gut feelings, and I think it's year one, and I more than likely will find ways of incorporating it into areas that could use it.
Right. So I'm Paul Martin, and this is Sweetland Farm. Primarily what we do is we have a CSA in the summer. So we have a 400 member summer CSA, and then have about 20 acres in production, with about 1/3 of that in cover crop at all times. So 2 years ago we started this grant with the NRCS, adding a ton of biochar per acre to 20 acres. Was interested hearing that you can hold water better, can hold nutrients better. So it seemed like a good thing for the farm, and it also seemed good globally to sequester carbon. So basically I build this pile of green waste, and then I basically top it with biochar and chicken manure, and then we continue to turn it Yeah, that when I went into it and we found out that it was available, I didn't really know that much about it, and it seems like everyone's still kind of learning. I also am interested in the carbon capture, and in the bigger frame of having companies have offset their carbon costs and being able to get farmers to get nutrients or things back into their farm.
Here's the kerns are right here.
Oh yeah, how's that working?
So this is a little experimental. We're at Big River Chestnuts. This is our farm in South Deerfield, Connecticut River Valley. Got 67 acres total, of which right now there's probably about 40 acres in chestnuts. And it's mostly chestnuts, but there's also walnuts and hickories and persimmons and hazelnuts and lots of tree crops. We've been using biochar just beginning this year. We got some funding through NRCS, Natural Resource Conservation Service, to apply a biochar compost mix because of the degradation of these soils. So these soils are pretty compacted. They were in tillage ag for generations, and they've depleted in organic matter. So we're doing some subsoiling to break up compaction, then adding the biochar in, and it's a pretty large application across the whole field. So we're gonna be applying 4 yards per acre of a compost biochar mix, and we brought that in from a company that does large-scale production and using refuse and waste wood materials in Maine. All right, so here's the windrow biochar with the compost mixed in. It's 80% biochar, 20% compost. We mixed it and let it sit for several months so that the nutrients from the compost, the organisms, would inhabit and integrate with the biochar. We're applying it with a Stolfutz spreader. It seems to be pretty effective. We've tried out a few different things, a row mulcher, a manure spreader, but it looks like this piece of equipment is really working well for the mix because it's so lightweight. It needs just the right conditions to get it on. Yeah, so we're seeing that the biochar is really helpful in some of the areas of the property here where we've got really sandy soils, very depleted. In some of those most impacted areas, the biochar is going to be a carbon material that will get into the soil. It will hold nutrients. It'll hold the microbial life in the soil, jump-starting the system. And it has the compost with it, so it has the nutrients in there, the microbes, the organism to help get it started.
Well, I moved to central Amazon, Brazil, in the later 1990s. And if you're working as a soil scientist in the central Amazon, you cannot miss what's called terra preta soils, or terra preta gingio, or Amazonian dark earths. So these are these fantastically fertile soils scattered across the Amazon. Turns out that the reason why these soils tick as they do is because they are chock full of what we called at the time charcoal or biochar.
So one of the hypotheses is that the Amerindian populations actually use some sort of slash and char technique as a soil fertility enhancer.
So it's a regional name for a type of soil that is black, typically full of potsherds as evidence of human occupation, and typically also very high in phosphate and calcium. In these small pockets of soils, the biochar type carbon contents are very, very high compared to adjacent soils. And we can C14 date them. They originate from 2,000 to 8,000 years before present. And so we have an anthropogenic amendment stemming from the late 1990s when we studied these soils and started saying, can we recreate this? These are fantastically fertile. But what I really spent most of our time on is these ideas of retaining nutrients from liquid wastes on biochars made from the solid waste. So that's the project that we're doing at the moment on a New York dairy farm. Introducing pyrolysis and biochar in a dairy farm manure management context is very exciting because we can reduce the weight and volume dramatically. It means also transportation costs, storage requirements, greenhouse gases goes way down. And then we have a biochar-based fertilizer, one with nitrogen and one with phosphorus, that then can be combined as needed to make a fertilizer rather than a waste management problem.
So we've been looking at making a fertilizer product based on biochar that comes out here, so that we're using this material, the biochar, as a fertilizer specifically for phosphorus. Phosphorus doesn't have a gas phase, so what we put in here.
I'd been hearing about biochars for 10 years, and I go, how do you get all the water out, without spending a fortune? But then he said, if you get it to 40% dry matter, then there's enough BTUs in the solids that you can finish the pyrolysis process with no addition of energy. It's like, okay, that sounds good. And he said that they're a house for microbes and sponge for the nutrients, stabilize of nitrogen, phosphorus, etc. So in the spring, when the sun comes out and the warm comes up, it brings the soil to life very quickly so it can be optimally productive. Our first use of biochar would be on more remote fields where our phosphorus density is lower and we could get a quicker return on investment. We'll be doing probably about a 30 to 40 foot strip. Then you can compare the yield of the biochar strip versus both sides of it.
So the 4 treatments we have, and they're all balanced for phosphorus. So the first one is we applied biochar and then balanced fertilizer. And then the second one, we did the farm's normal approach would be they apply manure, and then we have starter fertilizer. The third one, we only use starter fertilizer, no other additional nutrients. And the fourth one is a full synthetic fertilizer where we balance the fertilizer to meet the same nutrients.
Well, biochar is a really powerful tool. It's not the answer. It's a tool in the toolbox of farmers that is not there now.
The results from our field research found that the addition of biochar didn't provide noticeable benefits in terms of plant health or growth compared with the compost treatments. Of course, this is only one study. It's done on a farm. There was a lot of variability over the field. And so, it has to be taken as such, as a single study. But we also we took a hard look at the scientific literature because we really wanted to dig into what we could understand the benefits are so we could recommend to farmers what they were. Many studies have reported improvements in soil properties such as water retention, aggregation of soil, nutrient retention, and in some cases increases in crop yield and how the plants use the nutrients in the soil. But these benefits are really variable across different climates and soil conditions. How the biochar is made, what it's made from and how it's prepared, what it's mixed with, for example, compost, fertilizer, that also changes its effects dramatically. We need to understand how and where it works best in temperate soils, in the crop and farming systems that we have here. We need more of those studies to be done, those field studies, to really dial that in. We need to test different biochar feedstocks, process temperatures, using the knowledge we have from previous scientific studies to test those in our soils here. And we need to take longer term perspectives on and study the effects for a longer period of time. So until there's more precise field research looking at farming systems analogous to your farm in your climate, we can't easily recommend that it's worth the cost, which is high, compared with time-tested practices that we already know work, like compost, cover cropping, diverse crop rotations, and the introduction of perennial crops where possible. For biochar to really make sense as a sustainable climate solution, it needs to be made in a way that filters toxic gases and captures the large amount of extra energy produced during pyrolysis. Advanced modern commercial plants can do this, but most farm-scale production, like we've seen here, don't do that. So this is why, at a certain scale, biochar could be transformational.